My name is Rahul Roy Chaudhary. I'm the Senior Fellow for South Asia at the Institute and the head of the South Asia program. Having been elected last year on the basis of effective governance and economic development, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's primary domestic focus has been on achieving these very two objectives. As a result, he has embarked on several mega projects that are in various stages of implementation. These include the Make in India program to boost manufacturing and employment, the Jan Dhan Yojana low-cost pension and insurance schemes for financial inclusivity, the Swachh Bharat campaign for a clean India, and earlier this month we saw the launch of Digital Week to invigorate the government's Digital India campaign for fast internet connections for households. These projects have all been widely welcomed, and the implementation is essential to meet the huge expectations generated by Prime Minister Modi's electoral victory. Yet they also present tremendous new challenges for the Modi government, including in some cases difficulties in relation to the federal center-state setup, legislative inaction, financial problems or regulatory delays. To discuss governance in India, new challenges and opportunities, I am delighted to introduce a very special guest speaker at the IISS today, Mr. Ajit Seth. Till a month ago, Mr. Seth was India's top civil servant, the Cabinet Secretary, a post he held for 4 years, including, importantly, throughout the first year of the new Modi government. In this capacity, Mr. Seth advised Prime Minister Modi on all major policy issues. Mr. Seth also played a key role in the smooth administrative transition following India's general election just over a year ago. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ram. Well, today I propose to speak on the challenges of governance which are being faced in India, and many of these challenges are not peculiar to India. They would be challenges which are faced by any other developing country at that part of the curve of development. And many of these challenges are also not new to the new government, which took office in May last year, so it's just a little over a year ago. Now, at the outset, let me thank Dr. Roy Chaudhary for inviting me to this, to the IISS, and for giving me this opportunity to interact with you. It's important to know the difficulties which come in the way of implementing various initiatives and programs and schemes in a country like India. It's important to understand why there are difficulties. It's also important to know the state of play, the progress that has been made, and particularly in the last 1 year, the manner in which expectations have risen, and there is a great arousal of hope and expectation. And this hope and expectation has altered the mood, not just in the administration or in the country as a whole, but I think there is a lot of expectation even outside of India, from India. So with this, and let me also preface my remarks by saying that I intend to, speak and dwell on the country, not on personalities. Now, one thing is clear, that change is in the air. Change not only change particularly after the elections, and change is in the air all over. The change is sweeping the world. But in India, you have the third generation after independence, which is coming into its own, and you have the children of a new generation of mobile technology. Yesterday I saw a young 18, 19-month-old boy from Pakistani parents who had given him their cell phone, and he was busy using both thumbs. And, whatever he does, might be digging out some applications or games or whatever. But so this is the sort of, the new generation children which we all know about. And the youth in the country are in ever increasing numbers joining the workforce, and it is these young people who have grown up in a different idiom, so to speak. They are now they've reached the stage where they can make a meaningful contribution to society. There are other changes taking place, changes from agriculture to manufacturing, for instance, from organized to unorganized to organized sector. There's a change in terms of movement of people, migration from rural areas to urban areas, either in search of jobs or whatever. And a time will come in the near future when it will be difficult to say. As at the moment we say that India lives in the villages, but I think in a few years it will be difficult to say that the majority of the Indian population lives in the villages, because the pace of urbanization is such that you have an increasing number of people coming to towns. Now this poses its own problems of including problems of governance, whether it's to provide safe drinking water, or to provide adequate housing or transportation or whatever. So, but meanwhile, the economic growth and statistics for the country, they continue to be good, especially in the last few months and years. And a lot has happened in the last 1 year, which on the economic side, where there has been, you can say that there has been improvement in governance, and certainly the figures for the economy, they are looking up. Now we had transparent auctions for spectrum and for coal, and we had liberalization of gold imports, and now these sent the right signals. There is the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister has been repeatedly talking about competitive and cooperative federalism. Now, I think it is symbolic of his interest and his bent in this direction that the single biggest ever transfer, vertical tax devolution, was done and was allowed when the share of the states from the divisible pool of central taxes was increased by one stroke from 32% to 42%. Now, this I think is a watershed in India's fiscal history. Mr. Chaudhary spoke of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, which is the world's biggest ever financial inclusion program. And in 9 months, in India we enrolled 149 million people with bank accounts. So now I think 99.9% families in India have a bank account with the inclusion of these 149 million. It's a huge figure and it's a massive achievement. But then it has its own challenges, because they've got the bank accounts, but they have to use the bank accounts. So you have comments in the press also saying that he's got the account but he's not using it, he's got nothing in the account. That's all right, but I think we should not cavil at this transition that has been made in terms of inclusion, and that is certainly, it is a challenge, and that has to be the next step. That not only the money that they put, even the meager amounts that they put, should be, they should have the sense of ownership. They should have the sense that they are going to be able to draw on, take a loan from the bank. And in fact, riding on that achievement, the government decided to give them insurance. And they have been, anybody who puts in 1 rupee per month into his bank account, he just has to actually fill out a form, or you can even email, or you can SMS his consent, and then automatically the bank will debit just 1 rupee per month, and he's going to get accident insurance, he's going to get life insurance, So he will have, the important thing is that he will have a sense of being included in all these facilities. The other big thing that's going to happen in India, which has not yet happened, is the goods and services tax, the GST, which is going to be implemented. Now this again is going to be game changing, and the target is that by April 2016 this should be done. It's not been it's been a pretty tortuous course to get all the states to agree to this process, and the process has been going on for some time now, and for some years now. But it is hoped that I think by next April we should be able to get going. Now this is going to make again a huge difference. It's going to save the country a lot of money, and if the once it comes about, then it will help to remove a number of interstate barriers to movement of goods, and it would result in a huge saving for the economy as a whole. The government has also been in a big way trying to make use of the unique identification authority, the Aadhaar facility, where you use biometrics, including the capture of retina data and fingerprints of the hands, to provide a unique identity to the population. And already I think 87 or 88 crore people, that is, have been 800 million people have been covered, 880 billion people have been covered under this. It is the world's again largest such biometric capture program, but this is just the beginning. It's just a tool. The use to which it is being put is in ensuring, among other things, the cashless transfer of subsidy to the poor, and in 36 different schemes in the country, including in distribution of liquid petroleum gas, LPG cylinders, cooking gas cylinders to the population. It's being used in transfer of scholarships, in transfer of subsidies, in a host of activities. This is being used by the states and by the center. Now, there are a host of other social security benefits which are being pushed by the government, and ultimately what's happened is that we have a GDP growth rate of, well, in 2014-15 the figure is 7.3%, which was increased. Actually, the comparison is, you cannot really compare the two figures, because it used to be 6.9% earlier, and then the figures were revised upwards, because it was in 2000, the 2011-12 data was revised every few years, and that resulted in the sudden hike. But the fact is that if you compare with the other countries, we are moving at 7.3%, and we hope to cross the 8% figure. But I'm not actually harping on the 8% or the 7.3%. The point is that macroeconomic stability has been restored, and inflation is now contained. There's a low current account deficit, and there's more fiscal discipline, and of course it's all been helped partly by lower oil prices, which has been a boon for us, and the central bank has been able to reduce interest rates by 75 basis points, encouraged by the lowering in inflation. And now, side by side, a number of other reforms have been taking place, whether it's liberalizing FDI in defense, or in railways and insurance, and deregulation of energy prices. Now, this is just one small snapshot of one segment of economic activity where changes have been taking place. But then, even related to this, there are a lot of challenges. We still have to get the land acquisition bill passed in Parliament. Now, that is the problem. There is because of the nature of the politics in the Indian system, and the fact that the ruling party has a clear majority in the lower house and doesn't have one in the upper house, and that has its own compulsions. Getting the GST implemented by 2016 is again something, it is a challenge even now. And the other big thing is jobs, finding the jobs for people. Now we have, given our huge population, 1.2 billion, we have 1 million people entering the job market, million new people entering the job market every month. And this trend will continue for the next 22 years. Now this is a huge figure, 1 million a month. So we have no other option but to impart skills to people in a big way. And we have a huge national skill development program, and we have a whole apparatus for this. We have a skill development agency and a skill development corporation to oversee this and to implement this activity. And on that front also, we hope to be able to achieve progress and results. On the social sector side, there are a number of challenges, whether it is in the health sector or education sector. And education, again, the primary education, school education, and the higher education. Because we are conscious of the fact that it's not just enough to ratchet up numbers of people who are going to go to school and to come out through the school system, but we have to pay attention to the quality of education also. Both things have to go on side by side. Now, infrastructure apart from social sector, roads, development of the coal production or power generation, or ports. We have, the government in the last 1 year has been stressing on what is known as the Sagar Mala project, where you have you develop the ports around the country, all the major ports around the country, and not have just ports for port's sake, but then ports should be instruments for seeding development around the ports. And for that we have to have adequate infrastructure, adequate linkages of roads, rail and other means of communication to the ports. Then agriculture is a big challenge, because we want a second green revolution, or as Professor Swaminathan says, we want an evergreen revolution. So that is a big challenge, and fortunately the agriculture growth has improved, but we have to face the challenge not only of providing, maybe ensuring that in places where the water table is too high, they shift to other crops. For instance, in areas like the Punjab, there are problems of the water table. Punjab area, which is great granary, they've been going in for rice in a big way. We don't want rice to be cultivated there. It should actually go to the eastern part of the country. And you have new areas where wheat production has increased phenomenally. For instance, central India, in Madhya Pradesh, where they are having problems for plenty. So that leads us to the other challenge of storage of food grains. The Food Corporation of India is a monolith and has been storing grain over the years, but the Prime Minister has been insisting time and again that it needs to be not just modernized but recast, because it needs to be restructured actually. So there's a committee which is going into this and trying to see how the Food Corporation of India can be restructured. There are problems in urban governance. We had in the 2011 census, the urban population was about 31 or 32% of the total, which is about 377 million. And it's projected to grow by 2050 to 50%. So half the country by 2050 should be living in urban areas. And at the moment also the urban population is second only to that of China. And we have over 4,000 what are known as statutory towns, and 3,800 or 3,900 what are known as census towns, and 53 cities with a population of over 1 million. Now, the problem here is gaps in capacity, lack of trained manpower or skill upgradation that's required. And we're trying to go in for public-private partnership in a big way in trying to ensure that it's done. And the real problem is that municipal administration is a specialized sort of activity in itself, but not just a question of training or of giving them building capacity. Actually, it's a question of empowerment. Unless there is a flow of funds to the municipal bodies, and not just by transfers, because we found that if you transfer funds, like we did in JNN URM, that's the Urban Renewal Mission, which was started a few years ago, it didn't succeed. So money was transferred, but somehow they were not able to pull it off. They couldn't utilize that money. They were supposed to be reformed. They were supposed to be reforms in municipal taxation, and they should have been able to generate their own local resources through rates, but they were not able to do it. Maybe they didn't want to do it, and they had become used to a system where they would get the money from the center and use that for whatever, to buy buses or to improve on the street lighting or whatever. But unless there is some ownership of the activities by the local urban bodies, and unless they are able to generate their own resources, it's not going to be successful. So that's one challenge that we have, and that would of course lead to improvement in urban infrastructure. So we are trying to do this by creation of special purpose vehicles and using public-private partnerships, using that mode, and apart from of course the making finances and contributions from the central and the state governments. But most importantly, I think we'll have to raise finances, and we'll have to involve the local citizens. Mr. Roy Chaudhary spoke of initiatives like Make in India and Digital India and things like this, which a number of initiatives have been launched, again by way of trying to harness the potential of the country to see that there's more manufacturing activity in the country, particularly in the small and medium enterprises. But now I want to add, Mr. Rachel tells me that my time is almost up, so I think wind down. I'll just say that what challenges does this pose for the administration? Now, as Cabinet Secretary, I had to oversee a number of things. I suppose any Cabinet Secretary is supposed to keep a number of balls afloat in the air at the same time while walking on thin ice. So I had to do that. But my main challenge was really to see that silos are broken down, that there's more coordination among departments, among ministries, among individuals. And we have a system of what we call a COS, a Committee of Secretaries, in the Cabinet Secretariat, which is really a wall-breaking exercise, where we have the secretaries to various departments coming in whenever there's a lack of agreement. There often is, and because people tend to take departmental positions and get them together, and they don't leave the room till there is consensus, and usually try to see that nobody less than a secretary comes into the room, and that was possible. And what was not usually possible was that you come into the room without a piece of paper. because I don't want you to start now telling me what the departmental position is, what your stand is. I mean, we are here to see that, we come to a common meeting ground, and there has to be some give and take. But that ensured that the proposals which went to the cabinet were agreed positions, so that a good cabinet decision is one in which there is no discussion, and all the ministers are able to say, we agree with it. However reluctantly they might agree, but they'd better agree. It's not easy. But that's the way we try to do it. And one thing that I think needs to be realized is that administering a country like India is an extremely complex activity. It's a very complex country. You have differences in language, in eating habits, in climate, in food, in clothes, in religion, in culture, and what have you. And getting consensus within the country, it's a politician's nightmare, it's a administrator's nightmare, and but it's done. I mean, I know even in a country like England, there are, you have to contend with different positions and different stands which people take, and they dig in, and it happens in every country in the world. So, but I consider myself fortunate that I got to serve for 40 years in the a little more than 40 years in the administrative service, and fortunate also because of the wealth of the variety of experience that I got. I'll just give you one example of the sort of practical problems that you hear. I was 6 years into service, and I got my first posting as a district officer, what's known as district magistrate. People worry, what is a district magistrate? Are you a magistrate? Yes, you are. You have magisterial functions, and you control the criminal administration of the district. The superintendent of police, chief constable as he's called here, he's with you, and he reports to you, and it was my very first day, and I was woken up at about 5 a.m. in the morning, and by a phone call, somebody saying that he said in Hindi, he said कि वो डाकू अद्धा ले गए. That means dacoits, criminals have run away with a I don't know the English translation, just a half something. I didn't know what that something was. I mean, it's a half. So I turned to my orderly there, standing. And I asked him, "What's this?" And he could sense my ignorance. He says, "What they're saying is that half the train has been hijacked." And then I rang up the station master, and I could hear gunshots on the phone. And he says that guns are being fired, and they've already run off with half the train and the dacoits. And what do I do? So I had to put on a brave face. I said, "Don't worry at all. Help is at hand." I had to say this to reassure him. I hadn't a clue what help was going to be given to him. But it was 5 a.m. in the morning, my first day in the district. And but it got worked out. Fortunately, you can't run away with the train except on the track. And those people were caught. They were overpowered. They were due process of law. They were jailed. But so this is one aspect. The other could be maybe setting revenue records right, where you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands, because you haven't had consolidation of holdings of land, and you have these land titles which are not in the best of state, and you have those revenue records for each small parcel of land which has to be reassessed, and you have to deal with and provide every help you can to the poor landholders who have small parcels, so that they're reassured about their title, their ownership, and the possession of the land, which is important. So it could be anything. It could be providing food and ration. But then a lot of things are happening, and information technology is being used in a big way now. It's been embraced in a big way now, and and I think especially the renewed focus which the new Prime Minister has given on the use of information technology and the use of crowdsourcing. He's a big one for using social media, and I can see now, in fact I also learnt in the process the enormous power which social media has to generate or to learn about what the public opinion is. So these are things, so it makes for very an interesting period, and this is the reason why I think down the line, including the administration, people feel enthused, they feel charged. So it's a period of great hope, as I said in the beginning. A lot of things are happening, and I think we should see a number of achievements and things turning for the better in the months and years to come. But I'll wait for any clarification or discussion or any questions that you might wish to pose.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think you've very well brought out the administrative complexities and the challenges of governance in India. I think not only in terms of the your example of a train, half a train being taken over by dacoits, but also I think more visibly by your elaboration of the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan program and how important it is to ensure financial inclusivity to the best manner possible. What we've seen in the last year has been clearly a set of ambitious programs that have been brought about. There have been clearly some success in some of these. But the question I have, and I have two questions, and we'll open up for discussion and other questions. The two related questions I have on this issue are, firstly, that the problem that several governments in India have faced is one of implementation and delivery, where there is clearly effective policy initiation, formulation, launch, but delivery and implementation becomes difficult at times. You've alluded to some successes clearly, but what is in your mind is or could be different in this government in terms of ensuring implementation and delivery on a number of schemes? Related to this is a question on elections, which you haven't touched on. I know there hasn't been enough time on this, but one of the problems one sees in India from the outside is the electoral schedule that is quite challenging, not only in terms of the general elections, but also state assembly elections for 29 states, etc. Now, on an issue of the land acquisition bill that you mentioned, there is clearly a sense that the government may not want to move forward with the LAB in the Rajya Sabha to be defeated to ensure there's a joint session of parliament before the Bihar assembly elections, for example, later this year. But then after that we have West Bengal, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. So is there any way in which you think, with your experience of 40 years, that there's any possibility of buffering some of the administrative issues on this in terms of political control for implementation? If you answer that, then I'll take on other questions.
Okay. Now the first one was about implementation. Now I think you've touched the most vital point relating to governance, and that is implementation. Ultimately, the key is implementation, and we have to ensure that we are not caught into a tick box culture where rote routine compliance is a substitute for implementation, and you just sort of go through the process, as it were, and then claim that you've done it. And sometimes we do get caught in that trap, and sometimes it does happen. In India, it happens in many other developing countries. And linked to that is the question of accountability. So how do you get the civil servants or the government machinery or machinery of the public sector undertakings, the parastatals, or any agency for that matter, how do you get them to feel accountable? How do you get individuals to feel accountable, and how do you measure progress? Now, two things here. One is that we have started and we have drawn and learned something from the British experience also, and from that of some other countries. That is, we have started performance monitoring and performance management and performance monitoring, where we've done it with the central government so far, where we asked the Indian. See, earlier we had toyed with the French system of having MOUs with the Paris chattels, but then we moved on to this as performance monitoring, and where you agree on a certain set of achievable targets at the beginning of the year, and you come up with what is known as the results framework document, the RFD. And on the basis of the RFD, the secretary to the department, they propose something, and it's discussed by a body of experts, including people who have been in that department. They might have been secretary, that's the top administrative head of the department in years gone by, and they might be now superannuated, retired. And they vet it, and they finally agree to a certain set of figures. And on the basis of that, there is a certain ranking of the different departments which is done. And this is, the theory is that this would exert some sort of a peer pressure, and the departments would be enthused to do better. That's one. But the more important thing is constant monitoring. The Prime Minister himself said what happened in the last 1 year. In the last 1 year, see, the Prime Minister, for instance, he does such detailed, and the ministers at their level, very detailed reviews of monitoring of progress in particularly the infrastructure sector and other sectors, which I think is yielding results. It's early to say, it's just been a year, but I think it's yielding results. So, in fact, a new initiative called Pragati has been launched, where with the chief secretaries of the various states, in 30 odd states, where they come online, and we, in fact, I used to follow it a lot myself, that we go in for a lot of video conferencing. It's time consuming, and in a big country, to call everyone over for a meeting. So sometimes they are called, but usually we go in for video conferencing, which is I think a very effective way to get through. But then tracking up, you fix certain targets, or you agree on certain targets, and then every month we ask them, where are you and what have you done? So I think this is something which was not being done in such a big way in the last before the last 1 year, which is being done now. I think it's going to and there are other things, but I think for paucity of time I'll not elaborate too much on this. You talked of elections being held every now and then, and all year round you're having elections. Now, which is a fact, because in India you have 0.83 billion registered voters. It's a big figure, 0.83 billion. And the actual number who voted was more than 500 million. And so it was almost a two-third turnout, 66.4% to be precise, turnout in the elections. And you have almost 1 million polling stations. Now, if you look at and we have 5 million people who are employed in the conduct of elections. I'm talking general elections. So 5 million people. Now, these are huge figures. Again, an administrative problem. I mean, 5 million is not the population of the whole country, of many countries. You have countries less than 5 million population. Here, 5 million is the number of poll personnel who are, and again, and I've seen all sorts of things. I was 2 years into the service, and I had to conduct an election. And I was in charge of subdivision within a district, and that subdivision might be having a population of about 400,000 or something like that. So it was a very small unit of administration, and I had just 1 or 2 years of experience. And I saw funny things. I mean, people would run after the vehicle carrying the ballot boxes, and they would be stored. And we pay a lot of attention to elections. It's almost this is one area which has been never there has been any complaint of any malpractices. There are election petitions, that is different, but the system as a whole, I think, has been very well preserved in the last 60 years. and people have great respect for this. They've hardly ever any complaints that, I know one minister who lost by one vote. He didn't challenge he had the right to challenge it in a writ petition in the High Court. The election law allows it. He did not, and they accepted the verdict as fair. So people would, they would stick a 10 rupee note or a 1 rupee note on the door of the room where the ballot boxes were stored, because the agents of the candidates are allowed, or the parties are allowed, to stand outside or sleep outside the door where the room where the ballot boxes are stored for a day, till they are transported the next day. And they were great enthusiasm. We don't want anybody to tamper with it. And, not that anybody was tampering, but anyway, they just want to be sure, because there's police guard, there's everything. But they would, for want of any other seal, they'd put their banknote with the number they have. So they say, if this gets torn or replaced, we'll know this door has been opened. But it's just enthusiasm. Things have changed. We now use electronic voting machines. We've been using them for quite some years. So the results are known within a few hours of the counting process starting. So it's very nice to see on the TV screens how the figures just keep rolling, and every half an hour you've got completely changed. As the trends start to come in. So, but it is a real problem. You have, is it known as the English disease? You have elections around the year. There used to be an expression I used to hear years ago. We have the disease, certainly. We have elections around the year. So because so many states, and some state or the other is going to elections sometime. And you might theoretically say that why don't you have all the elections done at one go and then get done with it for 5 years? It doesn't happen, because at some stage the government might fall, they may not have a majority, and then that cycle breaks, and you have election out of sync by a few months or a year or 2 years, something, and gradually over 5-10 years it becomes a little awry. But yes, there has been talk of reform in this for some time. It will save a lot of time, save a lot of money, and release a lot of blocked time for people to, for the administration particularly, and for the politicians to devote themselves to development work. But while the talk has been going on, I'm in no position to promise that, in the near future, there's going to be a solution to this. But point well taken. Lastly, you mentioned about the land acquisition bill. 2 days ago, there was a full-page article in the Financial Times here in London on the land acquisition, the problems with the land acquisition bill. It's important. Our land acquisition law is of 1894. It's over 100 years old. And in 1984, some changes were made in that law. And the allegation is of the people who criticize the bill, the act. They say that it is unfriendly to the farmers whose land is acquired, and consequently it is beneficial to industry, because over the years what's happening is that the state has been acquiring land not just for itself, but for activities of manufacturing and industry, which they allege that it's actually helping the industry. But then the counter argument is that, actually the whole process of acquisition is a little cumbersome, because you have to first issue a notice and invite objections, and then ultimately some figure for compensation is given, and the farmers complain that what we get as compensation is a pittance compared to the value which is unlocked by the industrialist who gets the land. And then a few years ago, in the previous regime, they made certain changes in the Land Acquisition Act, and essentially what they did was that they enhanced the compensation that was payable to the farmers whose land was being taken, and they said that you must get the prior consent of 70% to 80% of the farmers, and not just the farmers. Then later, the latest modification is that also those who are landless but who derive their livelihood from working in those fields as landless laborers, their consent is also required. But then a problem arose, because they said, I want to build a canal, or I want to build a railway line, or I want to build a road from A to B, which is 300 kilometers away, and you say that you cannot start work of acquiring the land or of starting construction for this railway line or canal or road or power line. till every what is known as the Gram Sabha, every village body in that route says yes. But there'll be some, it's like that Asterix comic, there's one village holding forth and saying we don't agree. So somebody is going to say no in those tens of villages which are involved. And because of that one village, the whole project is stalled. So you end up with the situation of stalled projects. So then the government took a view that okay, for so-called linear projects, that's power lines or roads or canals, something, this stipulation will not hold, and if you got even 60% consent, just go ahead and do it, and in due course the consent will come. That speeded up matters, but not enough. So now it's a game of political jousting also, because people take up positions, parties take up positions, but I mean that is the essence of the problem. And we are hopeful that there will be a consensus that this, because everyone knows and everyone realizes that we do require a process which is equitable, fair to the farmers, and at the same time, it's important. Ultimately, it's his land. So you have a system, you have some safeguards built in that the people whose land has been taken, they will be given employment opportunities in the activities or in the industrial activity which comes up in that land. And at the same time, the purpose for which the land is being acquired, or the entity for which the land is being acquired, they should be able to get the land fast so that activity can start. So I think we should be. You talked about joint session of Parliament. Well, that is I'll not be able to comment on that just now, because ultimately I don't know whether what method. It's all a question of building up consensus.
Sure, excellent. We have several people on the list who want to ask questions or make comments. Let me start with the first two. Gautam, if you could identify yourself just for set.
Excellency.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for this eloquent message of hope, which I share, and coming from you, it gives us encouragement, given that you've been in the system for so long. Actually, I think the last 6 years has been what a phenomenal success compared to the previous 800. If you compare, India has made huge progress, little bit of delay between third 5-year plan and 1984. There's one area which is not in the control of the government, which I think there's not enough time to address, which is India's trade GDP ratio is 42%. And there are some important potential challenges which may come from abroad. And one small example illustrates how important this is. 1% US GDP growth to generate a 1/3 increase in Indian exports to the United States, which has not been happening. Do you have a comment on how we deal with this? Because the external sector is now much more important than agriculture.
Let me take the second. If you
I have comments, not a question.
your comments. Okay, brief comments. Very brief.
Fine. Try to make it brief.
Very brief, please. There are a lot of people.
Nothing succeeds like success, and I think because of BJP's my name is Vipul Thakur. I am IISS member. Nothing succeeds like success, and BJP's success has helped India government, with the help of even left-wing Bengal government, to make boundary adjustments with Bangladesh. And now, in recent local polls in Bihar indicated that BJP is gaining ground. And I think if we recently see during the last 6 months, the private equity flows into India by leading institutions have really rocketed up, as well as financial institutions' investment in Indian markets, despite external challenges of Greece and other matters, are also very positive. So I think India has got a very good chance in view of falling oil price and gold price and commodity prices.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to Gautam, then we go to the next one?
Yeah, what you were saying was that how is the Indian trade deficit?
So basically the external sector is so big,
Okay.
and the challenges from abroad which will impact on these plans that we all hope will succeed.
Well, I think they will. You see, there's change taking place in every sector, and including in the. You see, this is all linked to the initiatives which the Prime Minister has been, laying thrust upon. Is actually linked to this, because he, in 15th August 2014, in his Independence Day speech, he spoke about Make in India and all, which is really a code word for saying that you want to boost manufacturing in the country. And I think the response from the external from the countries who are trade partners has been very positive, and these countries have been showing increasing interest in setting up manufacturing base in India. Now, this is all linked to the growth in the Indian industry, to match the capabilities, to match the quality, and match the infrastructure and skills of the workers. We have people, villagers from in Andhra Pradesh near Hyderabad, who are making the most sophisticated avionics and this thing for US helicopters. We know that. So there are little pockets where all this is happening, and I think that this is definitely going to increase in a big way. At the moment, our biggest earnings are the biggest, you might say, is from maybe gems and jewelry and things like this. But this is not where the future is. I mean, this is fine. This is handicrafts. And this is where it's basically in manufacturing that I think we are going to do that. What Mr. Thakur talked about was increased private equity flows into India. Now, this is, I think, a reflection of the increasing confidence which the global community has in the Indian economy. And, in so many sectors, I mean, for instance, solar energy. Now, we had a target of 20,000 megawatt of solar energy generation. The Prime Minister raised it last year to 100,000, 5 times increase in just one stroke. And there was an international conference, a global conference that held in New Delhi. People came from all over the world. They expressed confidence and they said, no, we are going to invest. And in fact, people earned what were called, I forget the name, some certificates, solar, where they've given a commitment, they've given a promise that we are going to ensure that so much of this, megawatts will be our responsibility, whether it is through rooftop or whether it's through solar farms or roadside panels or whatever. Our import bill for IT hardware will overtake our oil import bill by 2020. We are going in for IT in such a big way. So I see, I'm full of hope. I'm absolutely full of hope the way things are going.
Thank you. The last gentleman here, yes, in the second row.
Hi there, yeah, my name is Dan Rycroft. I'm from the University of East Anglia. 2 questions, if I may. I'll be very brief with both of them. They both sort of pertain to the role of universities in understanding the changes going on in India and also potentially the Indian universities also implementing things. The first line of inquiry is about RUSA, so this new national mission for education, so higher education. Whether the present government is very active in implementing that program, but it was a program that was established beforehand. So I'm interested to hear your reflections on RUSA. Secondly, I'd be interested to think more about the present government and its relationship outside of India. We've heard a lot about the International Day of Yoga. I was wondering what you think Modi's sort of key international challenges are, and sort of what you think his approach to internationalism is.
Okay, let me just say the other person. Yes, Vinod.
You had a long experience. I would like you necessarily focus in the last year in the May. I would like you to take a longer view, say the last 15 years, when at least the 2 governments alternated, we experienced the 15 years. Focusing on 2 issues. One is the judiciary and the police nexus, and why the police are routinely abusing people in remand and custody, and why the judiciary is so slow in disposal of cases that amounts to denial of justice. That's the one area, looking back to the 15 years. And second, the corruption, which is a monumental issue, and you haven't actually mentioned at all. Why is it that difficult, at least to minimize this? And successive governments have found it very difficult. Rajiv Gandhi said back in 1989 that only 10% of the foreign aid goes to the real recipients. So has things gone for the worse or better? Why? Thank you.
I mean, these are big questions. Let me just add the person, and then we have to end the session.
I couldn't catch your name.
Vinod Kumar, I'm a member of this institute.
The last question, yes, please. If you identify yourself.
Yes, Krishnan Rade. My question is that how far the bureaucracy today is insulated from the common people, and more cozy with the politicians, which should have been otherwise, that they should have been less cozy with the politician, but more with the common people.
Thank you. I think if you answer these in the next few minutes, then we'll end the session. Okay. Okay, thank you. So 3 important questions. A friend from East Anglia, you mentioned about the what is the higher education policy for higher education institutions, and also about the Prime Minister's emphasis on. You mentioned specifically about the International Day of Yoga, but otherwise generally foreign relations. Yeah. Well, you see, there is an essential continuity in foreign relations of a country, and I think the present regime also is conscious of that, and so there has been no. But what has happened? You spoke about what's happened in the last 1 year. That the Prime Minister has certainly engaged with other countries in a big way, and he has made visits to a number of countries outside of India, and including, what's the date today? 13th. So including today he would be concluding his 4-nation tour, and he's visited almost a dozen and a half countries in the last 1 year. Now this is a he's a he reaches out, and he reached out on the day he began like that. I mean, on the day of his swearing in of his government, he did an unconventional thing. He invited the heads of state, heads of government of all the SAARC member nations to have to New Delhi for the swearing in, and it was a gesture which was very well received, and they all responded by coming, and he has continued that outward sort of reaching out spirit after that in the last 1 year. Now, to higher education, I'd just say that certainly the government is keen on building institutions of excellence. We have, on the one hand, you started MOOCs courses, and we're going it in a big way because, as I said, using information technology in every sphere, including in education and higher education. Because there is a problem in physical, movement, lack of availability of adequate roads, etc. It's the best thing, the natural thing for the country to go in for online courses, use of IT, and that is being embraced in a big way. Through the National Optical Fiber Network, NOFN, increasingly villages are being and small towns are being connected to universities and places of higher learning, and they are increasingly getting access to these courses. And generally also, we have 14 or 16 Indian institutes of technology, and we have again an increasing number of institutes of management. So these are institutions, more are being encouraged in different fields where you want to build centers of excellence in education, in particular in higher education. Lastly, you mentioned about International Day of Yoga. Well, the Prime Minister had announced in the United Nations General Assembly that he would like the day of the summer solstice to be celebrated as International Day of Yoga, and it was celebrated in a big way on the 21st of June. I was involved intimately in its the way it was. It grew gradually. We said let's have a big event, and then gradually, ultimately, we ended up with having 36,000 people in just one event on the main road of Delhi, and there were hundreds of thousands of people who around the country who did that, and 176 countries. In 176 countries, this event was celebrated in ways big and small. In Times Square in London, they had 30,000 people in Times Square, spontaneous. And in below the Eiffel Tower also, I think 7,000 or 8,000 people had assembled. So it went on. But that is not the point. The point is not that you have an event to celebrate it and then you say that's not the Prime Minister's intent either. The real intent is to actually increase awareness about wellness and about yoga is not actually about standing on your head or something of that sort. It's really about synergy, about integration of mind, body, and soul. And if that is the message which can, in Shanghai alone, you might be having, 200 yoga schools in Shanghai, just one city. So it's just a question of spreading the word about the right holistic method and what should be the right method. You don't want spurious
So do you think that's kind of a precursor to a broader sort of integrative agenda internationally?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so. It's just that you have a way of, a practice or way. Let it be known that this is it, and anybody, it's voluntary. Anybody who wishes to follow it, he is most welcome to do so. And there's no compulsion anywhere, not at all. And it's just about creating awareness. That's all. So then have I missed out on some question? Yeah, you said about how far the bureaucracy is insulated from people who cozy up with politicians. Now this is a huge governance issue, and I did talk about accountability, and accountability is related to vigilance and it's related to corruption, and it is all. There was what's his name? There was a gentleman from the US who had come in the 1950s, Dean Appleby. He was an administrator and an academician also, and Pandit Nehru had invited him to study the Indian administrative system and the administrative culture. And he said that you don't want a system where everyone takes approval or validation for everything from everyone else before anything gets started. Now, why I say this is that you do need to have to cut corners and to move. I won't say cut corners, but to cut the flab and cut unnecessary procedures and move ahead. But there has to be a balance in administration. There has to be balance. We're talking of huge numbers. I mean, the number of people, number of government servants under the central government in India is 3.6 million, and you have twice that number in the states. So you have 1 crore people who are in government. Now, how do you control that? I used to have a problem. I mean, I had to oversee so many of these so-called All India services and central services, and you have this vast mass of people, many of whom don't even get adequate training. You might train the top echelons, but so that's an issue which you have to address. Now, so on the one hand, you want them to speed up things. On the other hand, you want them to observe certain processes. Now, it's been famously said by one justice in the United States, Justice Frank Knight or something, I'm not sure of the name, in 1945 or so, he said that the history of the United States independence movement is the history of process. It's actually, you have to devise certain process to ensure that there are no deviants, that there is observance of rules, and there is accountability. So the challenge before the administration, again, very, very central to the whole issue of challenge of governance, is how do you get people to, on the one hand, observe process and not to become prisoners of process. And very often we do become prisoners of process, and that is what, when you say that there are delays and unconscionable delays, and so finding the right balance, trying to ensure. We have adopted so many things from the British, for instance, system. You have those citizens' charters, and we have the charters. We embraced this right to information in 2007. You had the Freedom of Information Act in 2005. I also am conscious of what the erstwhile Prime Minister had written in his autobiography about his views on the freedom of information, and it has its own. The bill itself, the act itself, poses a challenge for the administration, for the government. These are again complex things, but I think we set great store by it. We have a Chief Information Commissioner and 9 Information Commissioners who enforce this RTI, the right to information. It's been a game changer. It's there's a lot of sense of empowerment among poor and underprivileged people who now know that they can, with a simple application of 10 rupees, they can they can elicit any legitimate relevant information. So a lot is happening. I mean, there will be, of course, people who will cavil and criticize and all, but I think it's all the part of a game in any democracy. Our strength is that we are a democracy. That's a big strength. We are a country of so many languages, so many colors, so many smells, rituals. But I think despite all this, we are making progress and will continue to do so.
Excellent. Thank you. So on that note, we must end. We've gone beyond our time, scheduled time. But I'd like to thank you for really giving us an insight onto, as I said earlier, the complexities and challenges of governance in India. And as you, I think, rightly said, there is considerable expectation, but there's also an equal degree of hope in meeting these challenges as we go into the next few years of this government. So thank you very much for providing those insights to us, and we look forward to continuing to interact with you in the next few months and years. And I'd like all of you to join me in thanking our speaker.